Welcome to Business Class, a podcast for people wanting to upgrade their thinking, upgrade their learning, and upgrade their life. I'm your host, Eugenia Panderhos, founder of Business Class Collective, best-selling author, and life coach. If you're an entrepreneur, a startup, or someone who dreams of reaching their full potential, then you're in the right place. You'll feel empowered and inspired to design the life you've always wanted. Let's do this. Hello and welcome to the show. I'm so excited to be bringing you John Retsas from First Drop Wines. Anyone who knows anything about wine in South Australia knows about the Barossa Valley, and it's a renowned wine producing region just northeast of Adelaide. The area encompasses Tanunda, Anguston and Narooppa and has an array of high profile wineries, and I'm thrilled to be bringing you John Retsas from First Drop Wines. He'll be sharing his story about First Drop Wines that started in 2004 with a thirst for creating wines meant to be enjoyed, not just admired. It is known for crafting deliciously exciting wines that not only stand the test of time, but continue to push the boundaries of innovation, and you'll learn more about that in our podcast. The First Drop heritage traces back through generations of agriculturalists, winemakers and wine lovers. With a strong connection to land and a dedication to hard work, John and the First Drop family lead with quality, sustainability and purity at the forefront. They source the finest fruits from the Adelaide Hills, McLaren Vale, Eden Valley and the Barossa Valley to achieve diversity, complexity and flavour. Welcome to the show, John. I'm thrilled to have you here and for you to share your story as a winemaker in South Australia. You are a respected winemaker located in the Barossa Valley at the aptly named Home of the Brave, where you produce wine under the First Drop label. How did you come up with those names?
Yeah, good question. Back in 2004, when I established First Drop Wines, I didn't want to have a name for the brand that was part of my name or my surname. Just wanted something to be a little bit more, talking about, the excitement of the brand and the quality of the brand. First Drop is, I guess, a bit like when you press anything for the first time. The first drop of wine is the purest and the highest quality. That was the First Drop side of things. It's all about high quality, delicious wines of drinkability. Home of the Brave, a bit more interesting in that we started First Drop back in 2004 and started making grape varieties like Anise, Alvarinho, Montepulciano, Nebbiolo, Barbera, and Shiraz and, Cabernet, etc. But it was pretty brave 20 years ago in Australia to make alternative grape varieties for Australia or emerging grape varieties. And then also, you might recall 20 odd years ago, a lot of the labels and packaging in the wine industry were pretty kind of conservative and just spoke of, big brands and, everything sort of looked the same. When we started, with Mother's Milk, had a crazy cartoon story on there, and Evo Anise has got bright blues and yellows. The Minchia Montepulciano was kind of, controversial, but, all our labels are different and they're kind of cool. That was very brave, making alternative grape varieties and packaging them in a way where they hadn't been packaged before. So that was the Home of the Brave.
That's fascinating because your labels are exceptional.
We kind of changed the game and we're one of the first wineries to make alternative emerging grape varieties, which are now sort of common 20 years later.
You're a pioneer in that space, John.
I guess you could say so, yeah.
Well, you need some genius to come up with these names and to stick it out and make a name for yourself, because your wines are so well regarded and highly regarded. And I'm an advocate of your wine way before I knew you or Grace, to be quite honest. Especially the Mother's Milk is the one that I truly enjoyed. That's the first one I was introduced to and I loved it. Can you share what piqued your interest in wine and your journey into winemaking?
It was kind of a little bit by accident. I grew up in the country of South Australia in a little village called Ceduna, which is kind of in the middle of nowhere on the coast. My father was a Greek migrant, fisherman. Now, back in those days, there was no online retail when I was a kid growing up. There was no, Dan Murphy's or what have you. So we used to buy our wine from the pub and it was kind of flagons. And then the old man had a great idea that we started making wine at home. And little beknown to me, I sort of fell in love with the whole process. I thought it was kind of magical that how we could get these grapes and crush them and turn them into wine. Lucky enough to go for holidays to Greece to see my grandparents, and they made wine as well. So we ended up making wine 2 times a year, every year. And I was just sort of totally intoxicated by the whole wine thing. We moved to Adelaide and I went to uni and dropped out of uni and had to find a job. And I thought, well, you know what? I really like this whole wine vibe. I started working in the wine business, unqualified, unskilled, but lots of enthusiasm. And that was it. That was my beginning, back in 1996, I think it was.
So one door opens, another one closes, and then another one opens again.
You got it.
So making wines in Greece, what was that like?
So this was when I was young. I was kind of like 8, 9, 10 years old. So we used to go out and hand harvest these like old bush vines. No one really knew how old they were or exactly the grape varieties, but they were reds and whites. It was all hand harvested, and then we put the grapes into these big cane baskets onto the donkey. So I'm talking late 70s, early 80s Greece in the villages. So onto these donkeys, we bring them back to the farm where there was a huge concrete basin about 3 metres by 2 metres where all the kids would jump in and jump on the grapes. Then sort of my grandfather would take the fermenting grape juice and magically turn it into wine. It was really primitive. At least in Australia, we had the old hand cranked crusher and then the press. In Greece, it was very primitive, using old techniques and old machines that my grandfather had from God knows where, probably his grandfather. It was just such a laborious process, but it was also very infatuating. And you're taking this sweet grape juice and turning it into something that is delicious and goes so well with food. It goes so well with friends and family, and goes so well with lots of occasions. It's all about sharing. It totally sort of dominate everyday life for me.
Watching that wine making process, we used to make wine at home when I was growing up with my dad and my brothers and sisters, and put the grapes in the Hessian bags and then tread on them in the old bathtub and make wine, and dad would ferment it. And we had byproducts from that wine juice. We used to make grape juice syrup and a grape juice pudding.
Yep.
And that's a way of using every part of the grape.
You'd make a syrup, or a vino cotto, as the Italians would say, and some sort of like jelly as well. My grandmother used to take some of this and mix it with like ash from the fire and make some sort of jelly. In Greece, in particular, byproducts that you'd sort of see from the grapes. In Italy, when I worked there years ago, in Barolo, they'd roll their local cheese in the grape skins to help flavour and, I guess, who knows, preserve. There's lots of stuff, that poverty and desperate times and tough times dictate you can use every part of the grape. We still recycle now. We still send our stalks off to a farmer up the road who feeds it to his sheep. The pressings are turned into fertilizer and manure. Everything is used still, and we've gone to the point where we recycle all our water at the winery, and that's used for irrigation. It's kind of a closed process where everything is used and the water is recycled, and it's kind of cool. You feel good about it. You don't really realise it when you're doing it, but when you talk about it, it's like, okay, this is pretty cool. We're not really throwing much away at all.
That's a wonderful philosophy, John. I think going back to the old times where it was waste not whatnot, and now to have byproducts of what you produce to be used for other purposes, It's incredible. It's a life cycle, if you like, in reuse. I've just printed my second cookbook and was thrilled to know that it was printed with a printer who uses the sun, solar energy for printing. And I feel really proud about that. So I think
Absolutely.
anything you can do with that helps with the environment and recycling and reusing is fantastic. I've been a long-standing fan of the famous Mother's Milk Shiraz. You can imagine my delight when I met your beautiful wife, Grace, only to learn she is also the face behind the brand. And it's wonderful when our worlds collide. Besides Mother's Milk, you've talked about the other styles of wine that you made. Is there other styles that you're looking at making?
2004 pioneered a lot of, well, one of the pioneers, not the only ones, of course, Italian grape varieties. Nebbiolo, Barbera, Montepulciano, Anise, Pinot Grigio, Prosecco, Spanish and Portuguese grape varieties like Touriga Nacional. And I guess the next project for us, and it makes a lot of sense, material becomes available in Australia, and I think it is eminently available, would be Greek grape varieties. Xeno Mavro, Acítico, Mavro Daphne, Moscofilato, and Agriculturalists, and maybe a few others that will look at planting around the regions that we work in, which is the Barossa Valley, the Adelaide Hills, and McLaren Vale. So we'll just find the right grape variety for the right region, and we'll plant it there. And it's a bit of a process. It'll take a few years, but I think Greece is the word. It's the time for Greek grape varieties in Australia, and having travelled extensively through Greece and made some wine in Greece, I'm very excited to see what we can do in Australia for properly propagated, irrigated, planted, and cared for grape varieties from Greece. And the Greeks are only very new into the wine business. They've been making wine there for 5,000 years, so there must be something behind this.
They're doing something right.
Yeah.
I remember being in Crete and seeing the great big urns that were used for wine storage. I've had the privilege of visiting a beautiful winery near my parents' village, a famous winery. My dad worked there as a young boy, collecting grapes and picking grapes, and they've won awards for their wine. But importantly, those Greek wines are so beautifully paired with the Mediterranean diet and the flavors of Greece. They are just a match made in heaven for that type of eating. And that style of eating has really permeated through our culture in Australia. So I think it'll be a wonderful new venture for you to bring those great varieties here. Not many people know a lot about Greek wines. They associate it just with Retsina because they've traveled to Greece, and there's so much more to it.
Absolutely. So there's a few thousand indigenous Greek grape varieties throughout Greece. So it's a tiny country, probably the size of the state of Victoria as a whole. There's lots of indigenous grape varieties in Greece that are sort of unique to Greece. Yeah, it's a massive story, and it's a massive opportunity for all winemakers to embrace these new varieties. Should do well in Australia, and it definitely suits our Mediterranean climate, definitely suits our produce. And yeah, I'm really excited to be able to hopefully make them soon.
Fantastic, John. I look forward to sampling them. I can be your official sampler. As a wine producer, you would have seasons of intense work like harvesting, pressing, and vintage. Can you share what this is like and some of the joys and challenges of how it's done? And how do you procure workers to make that magic happen?
Yeah, so vintage is an intense period. It's an exciting period. It's my favourite time of the year. We bring in a few more members for the team to grow the team during vintage, to take on some of the laborious work of crushing and fermenting and pumping over all the craft that we carry out in the winery. That's a great time of the year. There's some beautiful aromas in the vineyard. There's beautiful aromas in the crusher when you're crushing this aromatic fruit and pressing and tasting fermenting juice. It's absolutely my favourite time of the year, and it's probably the best time of the year to be in the wine industry. As I've gotten a little older and as I've gotten busier, the team has now expanded to like 6 full-time staff during vintage. And I just take a role and now these days of, vineyard calling when the vineyard will be ready to harvest and crushing, and then maintenance on skins, the fermentation, tasting all the time, and then barreling down. So we've just finished vintage about a month ago. All of our wines are in oak, the ones that, need to be in oak. They're going through what we call a secondary fermentation or a malolactic fermentation now. And we'll taste all of those wines again probably in a few weeks' time to see how they're progressing, and then we'll top the barrels, sulphur the barrels, and put them to bed for 1, 2, or 3 years, depending on what we're making. Some varieties or some wines like Mother's Milk only sort of see oak for 10 months these days. But, wines like the single vineyard, Fat of the Lands and the creams, can be in oak for about 2 years and some of the more exclusive top end single vineyard bottling is for 3 years. It's a busy time now, still, but yeah, the main frantic time of the winery is vintage, which is typically from the beginning of March right through to the end of April, roughly.
Yes, I had the absolute pleasure of having a tour through your winery and through the stores there and seeing the vat and the machinery. The aroma was delightful, is all I can say to you.
Yeah,
So,
it's pretty cool that that time of the year. Not just at our winery, but at all wineries. It's a special time, and it's the time where the magic happens. We've taken these little berries and turning them into something which is delicious.
yes. There's a Latin saying, in vino veritas, which means there is truth in wine. How do you bottle your truth, John?
Yeah, so we're just true to who we are. We don't try to make the best wine in the world. We don't try to tell people that we're something that we're not. We will remember where we came from, and we look forward to the legacy that we're going to leave behind as a wine producer, as a brand, and as a person. We encourage all of our peers to do what we do and make the best wine that we can. And we try to lift each other up, not pull each other or drag each other down. That's the philosophy that I have been brought up with. And there's a very famous saying in Greek, not just in Latin, which is philotimo. Very hard to translate into English, but it's something about taking care of everyone around you and showing pride and hospitality and respect to everyone. So we live, and I try to teach my team and my family to live by this, and that is in Vino Veritas.
I love that. Yes, philotimo is a difficult word to translate, and it means doing something with your soul on purpose and with integrity. You've travelled extensively to Europe, America, and Asia, promoting your wine and creating business development opportunities for your brand. What are some of the hurdles you're experiencing entering new markets?
Yeah, there's a few, and the world has changed a lot since the craziness and the unusual times of COVID. But I think generally it's, in Europe, there's a lot of subsidies around agribusiness and production of wine, and not just wine, but all agribusiness. In particular, wine is one that it's very difficult to compete in Europe because in Australia, we're not subsidised at all. You could probably say that, the industry here is, a total free market economy. We've got high cost of doing business. So competing in Europe and competing against the Europeans is a challenge for not just us, but for the whole industry, which unfortunately successive governments and bureaucracy and government bodies have failed to understand, and really we should have more support. So that's a real challenge. The premiumisation of Australian wine, whilst we do make some of the best wines in the world, being regarded as a premium wine producing country is an ongoing education process that all producers, despite the efforts of Wine Australia and other bodies, continue to do. And we fight to tell people how good we are, and we are very good as an industry. There's a lot of young, exciting winemakers making beautiful wines that are as good as anything. So that's an ongoing challenge for Australia and for not only for Australia, but for First Drop and for other wineries. So there's some significant challenges that we face on a daily basis in export markets. And obviously there's been lots of talk about, tariffs and China and whatever, but that's been resolved and we look forward to trading with our Chinese friends again. That was a great market and is a great market for all wine producers. Chinese people love wine. Wine pairs beautifully with delicious Chinese food, whether it's the spiciness and the peppers of northwest China or the, more aromatic dishes of southern China and of southeastern China. We feel as if wine and the massive population in China are a great opportunity for all producers, not just Australian producers. Then you look at other population centres like India, and that's the new frontier. Once there's some relief on tariffs there, I think that'll be another great opportunity for the whole wine industry as the Indian economy slowly becomes more sophisticated in terms of more sophisticated consumers and the middle class continues to grow. I think India is a great nation for embracing wine. The opportunities are massive if we get a bit of a free run. I see China as a huge opportunity. I see India as an amazing opportunity. I see more work into America, 330 million people. That's a huge market for Australia that be in and do more in. So the opportunities are limitless globally. Also domestically, locally, I see an ongoing education process for our sommeliers and our hospitality trade to drink more Australian wine because quite often it's as good as anything. Quite often it's priced better than anything. And you're supporting local jobs, you're supporting local winemakers, local families. It's a bit like using, green energy. You feel good about yourself when you're drinking Australian wine.
What type of wines do the Chinese and Indians drink? Is it certain varieties that are their favourites?
Well, in China, it's red wine predominantly, although things have changed in the last few years where they're drinking more white wine and some sparkling wine, believe it or not. Sparkling goes really well with some Chinese cuisine, so that's a thing. India's quite an emerging and embryonic wine market, so they're kind of feeling their way. I'm not entirely sure what the numbers show in India, but definitely Chinese is red wine predominant, although that is slowly changing and there's some white wine being sent to China, which is fantastic. If you went to America, there's a lot of Sauvignon Blanc drank from here and from New Zealand, and they love Pinots in all over the place. And Cabernet is a big skew over there, so it's a big variety. Americans love Cab Sav, and they love Shiraz as well, but Cab Sav seems to be the red wine of choice along with Pinot.
It's softer on the palate. How do you stay motivated, John?
Just have to keep on going, and life throws hurdles at you in business and in life generally. You just need to push on. You love what you do. You jump out of bed and you try to make the world a better place and a more sociable place. Try to act with the integrity of Philotimo and honesty and credibility that we discussed earlier, and power on.
What have been some of your memorable highs, awards, recognition?
We won the inaugural Young Gunner Wine Award. I think it was in 2007. That was the first time that award was cast in Australia. That was pretty cool. 5-star reviews with Halliday, which is very, very, very humbling. Wine Spectator, sort of top 100 best wines a few times. James Suckling, top 100 best. Matthew Jukes, who's an amazing supporter of the Australian wine industry and absolute hero in my eyes in the UK, in his top 100 several times of the best wines of the year. There's lots of awards and accolades, which we're very grateful for, and try our very best to make the best wines from the regions and the varieties we make wine from. For me, it's also a case of, when you go to a restaurant and you see people drinking your wine, that's enough for me too as well. It's like, wow, somebody's put it on the list and somebody's drinking it. So that's a cool thing. We've been very blessed to have been recognised and awarded and reviewed since we started in 2004. So the last 20 years, I guess now, the wines are consistent. I think we're doing something right in terms of packaging and storytelling and making wines of honesty and drinkability.
Fantastic. How do you celebrate your wins?
Not much anymore. Just might have a cup of tea at home. No kidding. It's important to celebrate and mark milestones in life, whether they're birthdays or whether they're reviews and stuff. So it's normally just low key with family. We don't make a big hoo ha. I think being humble is very important. It's a great trait. If somebody asks, we'll tell them, but we don't bang on about stuff that is out of our hands. We just, if we're awarded something and we win something, that's great. And if we don't, that's also great.
Comes back to integrity and being humble and knowing your why in life. What's the best piece of advice you've received, John?
The best piece of advice I've had, I used to work when I first got to the Barossa at a winery called St. Hallett. And in those days, the owner, who was just selling the business, one of the owners was a bloke called Bob McLaren, an icon and an ornament to the industry. As part of my role there and handover, I worked with Bob for about a year. He was full of good advice and full of knowledge and wisdom. And he said, look, it doesn't matter, what happens and what you do, you still have to understand that we are making 750 mils of fun. Each bottle that you make and people buy and drink have to translate into 750 mils of fun. Because why else would you drink wine? Why else would you make wine? I take that on board, and that's great advice.
That's wonderful advice. You uncork a bottle, ready to enjoy and partake, and it needs to meet you where you're at.
100%.
What makes you smile?
My kids.
What's your favourite cuisine?
Greek food.
If you could travel anywhere in the world, where would it be?
Greece.
Do you prefer to text, call, voicemail, or other?
Cool.
Do you play a musical instrument? Do you sing, dance, or hum?
Very, very no to either of the others.
What's your favourite city?
It's Athens.
What's your happy place?
Aldinga Beach.
What's your favourite coffee?
Espresso.
Is there a movie that you could recommend?
There's lots of good movies, but I don't know. I don't have a favourite movie.
What's your biggest strength?
I had to laugh at myself.
If you could catch up with anyone, who would it be?
That's a good question. I'd like to talk to Napoleon or Julius Caesar or someone like a great Alexander the Great, like an old great general dude. I reckon that'd be pretty cool.
What's your favourite meal, breakfast, lunch, or dinner?
Dinner.
What was the best holiday you've ever had?
Oh, my last Greek island holiday.
Do you enjoy sweet or savoury?
Savoury.
Do you speak another language?
Yes, I speak Greek.
Is there a cause that you're passionate about?
We get asked to support all sorts of charities, but those children's charities that we support at Variety, Childhood Cancer, Canteen, Starlight, whatever they may be, they're very important. Nobody likes to see children suffer.
John, thank you for joining me on the Business Class podcast. It's been a wonderful pleasure to have you here and to share your story.
Thank you. Thanks for your time, Jenny. It's a pleasure to be finally talking to you.
You've been listening to Business Class presented by Eugenia Panterhos, founder of Business Class Collective. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcast, subscribe, rate and review this podcast. Share the love and let your family and friends know too. You can follow Business Class Collective on Instagram and Facebook. Join me next time. You've been listening to Business Class presented by Eugenia Panterhos, founder of Business Class Collective. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcast, subscribe, rate and review this podcast. Share the love and let your family and friends know too. You can follow Business Class Collective on Instagram and Facebook. Join me next time.